The chandeliers burned like constellations above Paris. Beneath them, hundreds of strangers shimmered in silken champagne light, their laughter clinking like glass. And somewhere at the edge of that brightness, Ava Coleman stood alone, her reflection fractured across a corridor of mirrors, 100 versions of herself staring back, asking the same question. How did I become invisible in my own story? That's how it began, the night she stopped being someone's secret and became someone's storm. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever loved someone who made you smaller so they could shine brighter, then stay with me. Like this story, leave a comment if it finds you, and follow this channel, because what happens next will remind you why silence should never be mistaken for peace. The air inside Hotel de Ville was perfumed with power, designer cologne, expensive anxiety, the kind of scent that clings to ambition. Every crystal, every gilded column whispered wealth and belonging. Ava pressed her palm against the cold marble wall, feeling the vibration of music from the ballroom beyond. It sounded like another world, one she'd been told wasn't hers to enter. Through the open doors, she could see Ethan Ward, her husband, standing under the chandeliers, his posture perfect, his smile calculated. He had always known how to fill a room. Tonight, he did it with practiced ease, a hand resting on the shoulder of a sleek blonde associate as he introduced her to the investors who could shape his future. The caption of his life was unfolding exactly as he'd scripted it. Brilliant American architect conquers Paris. And Ava? She wasn't even in the photograph. Her heart thudded softly, not from shock but from recognition. It wasn't the first time Ethan had erased her. It was simply the first time she could finally see it. 3 years of being told, you wouldn't enjoy this dinner. You'll come next time. They wouldn't understand us. Each excuse a brick in the wall that kept her out. Each smile of his a quiet apology wrapped in condescension. But tonight was different. Tonight was supposed to be hers too. The gala celebrated the grand opening of Maison Duval's new couture headquarters, a project Ethan's firm had designed, and one that Ava had secretly breathed life into. The textiles draped across those marble walls, the woven panels that softened the glass staircases, the color story that merged African heritage with Parisian classicism. Those were her hands, her nights, her vision. And yet, in the official credits, her name was nowhere. Not even a whisper. Ava's reflection shimmered in the mirror like a ghost caught between worlds. She had come to Paris chasing love and art, believing that together they could build something timeless. But love, she realized, doesn't survive where truth is suffocated. She adjusted the cuff of her blazer, a design she'd made herself, tailored in deep obsidian fabric that caught light with every movement. Her hair, natural and free, framed her face like a crown. Ethan once said she should straighten it for events like this. Too wild, he'd said. Tonight she wore it like defiance. Her phone buzzed. A message from him. Stay in the corridor. I'll find you soon. Don't make things awkward. Her throat tightened with something between laughter and rage. Awkward? After everything she'd given him, after every sketch and sleepless night, awkward was the word he chose. A waiter passed by, offering champagne. Ava took a glass, not to toast, but to hold on to something before she shattered. Through the reflection, she saw Ethan lean closer to the blonde, his laugh smooth, intimate. To everyone watching, they looked like a perfect couple. To Ava, they looked like a performance. Excusez-moi, madame, a voice interrupted softly. A woman, elegant, poised, wearing a gown of midnight blue, paused beside her. You're not going in? Ava smiled politely. Not yet. The woman tilted her head, studying her. You should. You look like you belong more than most. When she walked away, the words lingered. You look like you belong. It was the gentlest rebellion she'd ever heard. Ava turned toward the ballroom. The orchestra swelled, the doors opened wider, and she saw herself reflected 100 times, not as an outsider, but as someone waiting to step into her own light. For 3 years, she had whispered her art through someone else's name. For 3 years, she had been the invisible architect of beauty. But tonight, standing beneath Parisian chandeliers and centuries of history, she felt something ancient rise inside her, a voice her grandmother once called ancestral memory. It said, "You built this. Walk through the door." So she did. The music dimmed as she entered, every heel click echoing like a drumbeat. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. The air changed, electric, uncertain. Ethan looked up mid-sentence, and for the first time in their marriage, she watched him freeze. The light caught her shoulders. The fabric of her jacket shimmered with quiet power. She smiled, small, knowing. She didn't need his permission to exist here. Somewhere in the crowd, a photographer lifted his camera. The flash burst like lightning, and just like that, Ava Coleman, the woman Ethan had spent years hiding, was finally, irrevocably, seen. But what happens next? That's where everything unravels, and where she discovers what happens when the invisible decide to take up space. Before Paris, before the marble corridors and the mirrors that fractured her reflection, there was Chicago, where the city hummed with jazz and ambition, and dreams rose from brick and smoke. Ava Coleman had arrived there with a suitcase full of fabric, a sketchbook full of color, and a heart reckless enough to believe that love could be art if you were brave enough to create it. She met Ethan Ward on a night that felt almost scripted by fate. The gallery was small, tucked between a cafe and a bookstore in River North. Inside, her textile installations glowed like constellations. Threads stretched across black canvas, dyed in deep ochre and indigo, weaving stories of ancestry and survival. People passed by, murmuring admiration, not knowing that the artist stood quietly near the exit, too shy to claim the applause. Then Ethan appeared, tall, confident, his presence a spark in the dim room. He stopped in front of her piece titled Inheritance, studying the pattern with the kind of focus that felt intimate. "You've built architecture out of fabric," he said, voice low, deliberate. Ava laughed softly. "Or emotion, depending on who you ask." He turned toward her then, blue eyes steady. "Both, maybe. Emotion is just architecture without walls." That was how it began. Not with fireworks, but with words that felt like recognition. Ethan was an architect rising fast in the Chicago skyline, known for his ability to turn glass and concrete into poetry. She was an artist trying to weave her grandmother's legacy into modern design. Together, they seemed inevitable. Their first months unfolded like a film shot in golden light. They spent Sundays at the Art Institute, whispering to each other in front of Rothko's Orange and Yellow, arguing about form and feeling. They ate late dinners in Logan Square, where laughter spilled louder than the music, and he would reach for her hand under the table, his thumb tracing the lifeline on her palm as if promising a shared future. He admired her boldness, her color, her refusal to delude herself. "You see the world like no one else," he'd tell her. "You make ordinary things feel holy." And Ava, who had spent years hearing that her work was too ethnic, too emotional, or too niche, believed him. Ethan's world felt like permission. He made her think she could belong anywhere, even in the places that once whispered she didn't. When he proposed, it wasn't with a grand spectacle, but on the rooftop of his apartment overlooking the Chicago River. The city lights flickered like applause beneath them. "Let's build something together," he said, slipping a simple silver ring onto her finger. "You and me, art and architecture, structure and soul." It sounded like forever. Ava's grandmother, Lorraine, had warned her once, "Some people fall in love with your fire just so they can learn how to control it." But love, at the start, is deaf to wisdom. Ava saw only possibility. So when Ethan received the offer from the prestigious firm Moreau and Lemaire in Paris, a dream position designing for Europe's elite, he turned to her with the excitement of a child. "They want me to lead a project for Maison Duval. It's everything I've worked for." "Paris," she repeated, half disbelief, half wonder. "Paris," he said, smiling, "and I want you there with me. You'll find your place too. French couture, art collectives, design studios. We'll take this city by storm." She didn't hesitate. Within a month, she had sold most of her belongings, shipped her grandmother's sewing machine across the ocean, and packed her life into 4 suitcases. When the plane took off, she pressed her hand against the window, watching the lights of Chicago fade. It wasn't loss, it was transformation. Paris welcomed them with a beauty so sharp it almost hurt. The Seine shimmered like a secret, the architecture rose like music, and Ava thought she could hear the city breathing. Their apartment in Montmartre was small but perfect. Exposed brick, high ceilings, the faint hum of street musicians drifting through open windows. She filled it with color. Woven throws, abstract prints, the scent of jasmine and coffee. Ethan filled it with sketches and blueprints. For a while it worked. He'd return from meetings late, smelling of rain and ambition, and she'd be waiting with wine and stories of the fabric markets she'd discovered in St. Wen. They'd make love under skylights, whispering plans for a future where her art and his architecture would finally merge. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the city began to change him. Or perhaps it simply revealed him. It started with the dinners. They're traditional, he'd say. Old money. They wouldn't get your work yet. Then the parties, the introductions, where she was a friend or a creative collaborator. The words "my wife" seemed to vanish from his vocabulary. She tried to understand. He was navigating a new culture, a conservative industry. Maybe he was protecting them both. But the more he rose in Paris, the smaller she became. Ava began noticing how often he spoke of aesthetics and image, of presentation and perception. He was building not just structures, but a persona. And she, once the muse, became the compromise, something beautiful but inconvenient. One evening, she found a magazine on the kitchen counter featuring Ethan's latest project. Maison Duval Headquarters, a modern ode to elegance. She smiled, proud, until she turned the page. The photograph showed the interior, her fabric designs draped across the atrium, her patterns integrated into the glasswork. No mention, no credit, just Ethan Ward, visionary architect. When he came home, she asked quietly, "Why didn't they mention my name?" He looked at her as though she were naive. "It's a corporate project. The firm gets the credit, not individuals." "But they mentioned the design team." He shrugged. "Ava, don't start. This is how it works here." That night she couldn't sleep. The city outside sparkled like gold dust, but her chest felt heavy. Somewhere between his ambition and her devotion, she had lost ownership of her own brilliance. And yet, despite the ache, she still loved him. She still believed that maybe once he made partner, once he proved himself, he would see her again. See the woman who had crossed an ocean for him, who had woven herself into his dreams. She didn't know yet that love built on disappearance always collapses, no matter how beautiful the architecture. What she knew, standing by that window, watching the Eiffel Tower pulse with light, was that she was running out of excuses to make herself small. And one day soon, she would stop apologizing for being seen. Paris looked different when you felt unseen. In the beginning, the city had dazzled Ava. The way dawn light spilled across the Seine like liquid gold. How the sound of bells from Notre Dame echoed through narrow streets. But as months blurred into years, the same light began to sting her eyes. Beauty can become cruel when you're invisible inside it. Every morning, Ethan left their apartment wearing the same crisp suit and that same polished charm. "Another big day," he'd say, kissing her forehead without meeting her eyes. He always smelled like expensive aftershave and distance. When the door closed behind him, silence filled the space, thick, echoing, and suffocating. Ava would wander through the apartment that she had once decorated with color. Slowly, those colors had disappeared. The ochre walls she loved had been painted white. Her African masks and framed textile art were packed away. Too much clutter, Ethan had said. The living room had become a gallery of his taste. Clean lines, gray tones, sterile perfection. He said it made him look professional when colleagues came by. He never said the rest aloud. When they came by, they shouldn't see you. At first, Ava convinced herself it was temporary. Parisian society was old-fashioned, he'd explained. Once he earned their trust, he would bring her into the light. But the longer she waited, the more she began to feel like a roomer in her own home. When guests visited, she was always busy in the studio. When she insisted on joining, he'd lower his voice. "They wouldn't understand us, Ava. They come from a different world." Different. The word that once made her art unique now sounded like exile. The mask began to form then. Not the one she wore on her face, but the one that hollowed out her heart. She smiled when she wanted to scream, nodded when she wanted to argue. Every "I understand" was a thread pulling her tighter into silence. Still, she created. She always created. Her studio was the only corner Ethan hadn't claimed. There, bolts of fabric unfurled like prayers, deep crimson, violet, cobalt. Each color was a rebellion. She'd sit for hours at her grandmother's sewing machine, weaving patterns that told the truth she couldn't say aloud. She began calling the series The Hidden Ones. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the tall windows, Ava caught her reflection in the glass. Her own eyes startled her, tired, distant, as if watching a stranger live her life. For a long time, she simply stared. Then she whispered, "Who are you waiting to become?" That night, Ethan returned home in triumph. "Claude Moreau wants to meet again," he said, pacing as he spoke. "If I secure this contract, it'll make my partnership inevitable." She smiled faintly. "That's wonderful. He's invited us to dinner." Her heart lifted. "Us?" Ethan hesitated. "Actually, he suggested it be just me. It's better that way, trust me." Ava felt something inside her collapse with quiet precision, like glass cracking under pressure. She turned back to her fabrics, tracing the weave with her fingertips, grounding herself. Later, when he'd gone to bed, she stepped onto the balcony. Paris glowed beneath her. Thousands of windows, thousands of lives. Somewhere across the city, laughter spilled from a cafe, bright and unrestrained. She realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that. A week later, Ethan took her to a gallery opening for one of his clients. "It's casual," he said. "Don't overdo it." She wore a gold dress anyway, soft, sculptural, radiant. When they arrived, heads turned. The crowd was a sea of elegance and European coolness. Men in tailored tuxedos, women in effortless silk. Ava felt their eyes linger, not cruelly but curiously, as if she were an unexpected color in a monochrome world. Ethan stayed glued to his colleagues, introducing her to no one. When she tried to join a conversation about design, he gently placed a hand on her arm. "Not now," he murmured, still smiling for the others. "Not now" became his mantra, his way of postponing her existence. But the woman who refused to be seen at his side was also the one who carried his career in her hands. Late at night, when Ethan struggled to find inspiration, he'd turn to her. "You have such an eye," he'd say, watching as she sketched textile concepts that would later appear in his renderings. Her ideas made his work sing. Yet when the designs reached the firm, her name was nowhere near them. The day he presented her patterns to Moreau, Ava stood outside the office waiting for him to finish, eager, proud. When he emerged, his expression was triumphant. "They loved it," he said. "They?" she asked. "The team," he replied. "They think my approach is revolutionary." The single syllable sliced through her. She smiled anyway. She'd grown skilled at disguising pain. Weeks later, an industry magazine featured Ethan's project. The photographs showed her designs draped across marble staircases and ceiling-high windows. The caption read, "Ethan Ward, architect of modern emotion." Ava turned the page slowly. Her name wasn't there, not even a footnote. She closed the magazine and stared out the window at the gray Parisian sky. Somewhere, church bells rang the hour. That night she dreamed of Chicago, of color and noise and sunlight through her grandmother's lace curtains. When she woke, her pillow was wet. Ethan noticed her silence at breakfast. "You're distant lately," he said. "You need to relax. Maybe focus on smaller projects." "Smaller?" she repeated softly. "Or invisible?" He frowned. "You're reading too much into things. This is just how Paris works." "No," Ava said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is how you work." He stared at her, surprised. But before he could respond, she stood, gathering the untouched coffee cups. Outside, the city pulsed beneath a gray morning. Ava watched the people on the street, lovers, tourists, artists with paint-stained hands, and wondered when she had stopped being one of them. The masks of Paris were beautiful, but they hid everything: truth, shame, and the quiet despair of those who wore them too long. Ava adjusted her coat, lifted her chin, and stepped into the street. For the first time, she noticed the mannequins in the shop windows along Rue Saint-Honoré, flawless, elegant, faceless. She realized she had become one, and she promised herself that someday soon, she would break the glass. It began with a lie so elegant that Ava almost mistook it for devotion. Ethan told her it was temporary, that every omission, every quiet erasure was for their future, that the world simply wasn't ready yet to see what they were together. "Let me build the foundation first," he'd say, brushing his thumb along her jaw, his smile soft enough to disguise control. "Then we'll share it with everyone. I promise." Promises had always been his favorite architecture, beautiful structures with nothing holding them up. Ava wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that love could survive being hidden, that invisibility was sacrifice and not surrender. But love that asks for silence isn't love, it's strategy. And strategy, she was beginning to learn, doesn't keep you warm at night. It was spring when Maison Duval unveiled its new design project, a commission that would define Ethan's career. He'd spent months obsessing over it. The angles of glass, the curvature of marble, the balance of tradition and futurism. But behind those blueprints were her colors, her patterns, her hands. She had woven fabric panels that told a story no building ever could. Threads of deep indigo, gold, and rust moved through each piece like veins, an homage to West African textile history reimagined through a Parisian lens. It was, as she once told Ethan, heritage turned into light. He had kissed her forehead and whispered, "It's brilliant, Ava. You're brilliant." The next day, he presented them at his firm's meeting as his design team's new concept. She found out weeks later, standing before a model in his studio. The fabrics had been cut and mounted, her signature pattern unmistakable. The label beneath read, Maison Duval Concept, designed by Ethan Ward, senior architect. Her throat tightened. "You didn't credit me." He looked up from his desk, surprised. "What are you talking about?" "My work, the textiles. You use them in the concept." "I told you," he said calmly. "This project belongs to the firm. I can't attach your name. It complicates things legally." "Legally?" She almost laughed. "Or politically?" He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose like a man cornered by inconvenience. "Ava, please. You know how delicate this is. The partners are traditional. They'd never understand that my wife was involved in the creative process, especially not one who isn't in the firm." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Especially not one who looks like you." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ava stared at him, at the man she'd once believed was her greatest ally. Now he looked like a stranger wrapped in her trust. "So I'm a liability?" she said quietly. Ethan's voice softened, the way it always did when he wanted to make her doubt herself. "You're not hearing me. I'm protecting us. You have to see the long game." "The long game," she repeated, tasting the words like bitterness on her tongue. "Where I disappear so you can win." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. For the first time, his confidence faltered. "You're overreacting," he murmured. "This is how success works in Paris. Appearances matter." She looked around the studio, his sketches framed like scripture, her fabrics folded neatly in the corner like they didn't belong. "Maybe that's the problem," she said. "Everything here is about appearances. Nothing's real anymore." That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at her sewing table long after midnight, fingers tracing the edges of her designs. They looked like fragments of herself, pieces borrowed, taken, reassembled in someone else's name. For the first time, she wondered if love could survive theft. Weeks passed. Ethan's project gained momentum, and Paris's design world began to whisper his name with reverence. He was becoming a rising star, the American who understood French refinement. Invitations poured in, galas, interviews, magazine features, and in every photo he stood alone. Ava became the ghost behind his triumphs. He told her she was imagining things. "You know I couldn't have done this without you," he'd say, kissing her temple as if affection could erase omission. "We're in this together." But the word together began to rot between them. It no longer meant unity. It meant silence. Then, one morning she saw the announcement. The Maison Duval Gala, celebrating the visionaries behind the new headquarters. Ethan's firm was headlining. He was listed as the keynote architect. Her name was still nowhere. She waited until he came home that evening, his expression smug with success. "They've invited us to the gala," he said. "Well, technically, me, but it's a big night for the firm." Ava's heart pounded. "I'm coming." Ethan hesitated and she caught it. the flicker of panic. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said slowly. "Claude will be there, along with several investors. It's sensitive." "What's sensitive about your wife attending?" He exhaled, long and weary. "You know exactly what I mean." "No," she said, stepping closer. "I want to hear you say it." For a moment, he said nothing. Then, under the weight of her stare, he murmured, "Ava, please. You know how they are. The French design world is old, conservative. They won't understand." "They won't understand what?" His jaw tightened. "Us." The word hung in the air like a confession. Ava's vision blurred, but her voice was steady. "So you've built your career on the condition that I don't exist? That's not fair. Neither is pretending I'm invisible." He turned away, rubbing his temples. "You're twisting this. I'm doing what I have to do. Once I make partner, everything will change." She almost believed him. Almost. But then she saw the truth flicker across his face. The relief when she didn't fight harder. The calculation behind his gentleness. That night, while he slept, she walked through their apartment. Every corner whispered his taste, his paintings, his colors, his control. But in her studio, it was different. The air smelled of dye and freedom. She looked at her latest piece, a woven tapestry of gold thread and storm gray silk. It was meant to hang in Maison Duval's atrium. She touched it gently, feeling the pulse of her own defiance beneath the threads. "Let him have his marble and glass," she whispered. "This is mine." When dawn came, she was still awake, sketching. The first lines of something new took shape, a design meant not for him, not for his firm, but for herself. She didn't know it yet, but this would be the last project she'd ever create in his shadow. And when the lights of the gala finally glimmered on the horizon, Ava Coleman was no longer the woman who waited for permission to be seen. She was the woman ready to burn the mask to the ground. The night before the gala, Paris exhaled a cold rain that washed the color from its streets. The city seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something inevitable to crack. Inside the Montmartre apartment, Ava sat at her sewing table, the lamplight catching the gold thread between her fingers. Outside, thunder rolled across the rooftops, distant but coming closer, like a warning. Ethan came home late. His coat was damp, his smile rehearsed. "Big day tomorrow," he said, shaking droplets from his hair. "Claude confirmed my seat beside the Duval board. It's going to be an incredible night." Ava didn't look up from her work. "Our seat," she corrected softly. Ethan froze, just slightly. "What? Our seat? You said it's our project, our design. So I assume I'll be sitting beside you." He laughed, but it was thin and fragile. "Ava, not this again. We've talked about the gala." "Yes," she said, threading the needle with deliberate care. "You said you'd bring me when the time was right." When they were ready, she looked up. 3 years, Ethan. When does ready arrive?" He sighed, walking to the bar cart. "It's not about that. This is business, politics. These people." "These people?" Ava's voice cut in, sharper than she meant. "You mean people like Claude Moreau, who praise innovation but can't handle seeing a black woman beside their star architect?" Ethan's shoulders tensed. He poured whiskey into a glass but didn't drink. "That's not fair." "No," she said quietly. "It's honest." He turned, his patience thinning. "You're twisting everything. I'm trying to protect what we've built." "We?" Ava rose from the table. "You built your career on my designs, Ethan. My colors, my textures. You took my work and presented it as your firm's creation. You didn't protect me. You erased me." His jaw tightened. "You knew what you were agreeing to. Collaboration means acknowledgement," she snapped. "Not hiding me in the shadows so your clients can pretend you invented everything yourself." For a moment, silence pressed between them, thick and unbearable. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping the windows like 1,000 small accusations. Finally, Ethan spoke, his tone low. "Do you know what I've sacrificed to make this life possible? To be accepted here?" "Yes," Ava said, her voice trembling but steady. "You sacrificed me." He slammed his glass onto the counter, the sound sharp as breaking ice. "You're being emotional. You have no idea what it's like navigating this industry. One wrong impression, one misunderstanding, and everything collapses." She stepped closer, her words measured. then maybe it deserves to collapse. Ethan stared at her, disbelief flickering across his face. For the first time, she saw fear behind his arrogance, the fear of a man who had built his worth entirely on the approval of others. He softened his tone, shifting tactics. Ava, listen to me. Once I make partner, everything changes. We'll be equals again. I can finally introduce you properly. We'll celebrate your work. You just have to trust me a little longer. Trust you? She laughed bitterly. You've been saying that since we landed in Paris. I trusted you when you said we'd build something together. I trusted you when you promised my name would be in the credits. I even trusted you when you told me to stay home from that first dinner so you could test the waters. But the truth is, Ethan, you never planned on sharing the spotlight. He took a step toward her. You're wrong. She held his gaze unflinching. Then prove it. Bring me tomorrow. Stand beside me in front of your partners and call me your wife. Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came. That was her answer. Ava felt something inside her finally fracture. Not a break, but a clean split, like glass separating from its mold. There was no going back. She turned away, gathering the fabric she'd been working on. The gold threads shimmered under the lamp, alive with quiet defiance. Where are you going? He asked. To finish what's mine. He followed her into the studio. You can't show up there, Ava. It'll make things awkward. Awkward? She spun on him, her voice trembling with fury. I spent years designing the soul of your project. You paraded my work through boardrooms, and now you're afraid I'll embarrass you by existing? Tell me, Ethan, what exactly is so shameful about me? He flinched, but tried to recover. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Her tone softened, but her eyes didn't. You've built a world where I can't belong. And now you want me to thank you for keeping me out of it. He stood there, trapped between anger and guilt. If you go tomorrow, you'll ruin everything. Maybe everything needs to be ruined, she said. The storm outside intensified, lightning splitting the sky. Ava walked past him, her steps calm, almost ceremonial. In the doorway, she paused. You know what's funny? She said. You used to tell me my art had a heartbeat, that it made the world feel alive. But when you took it, when you claimed it as yours, it stopped breathing. She left him standing in the silence of his own success. In her studio, she worked until dawn, stitching defiance into every seam of her outfit for the gala. A suit unlike anything she'd ever made before. Structured yet fluid, bold yet elegant, a manifesto sewn from rebellion. The fabric caught light like liquid fire. Every thread whispered, I exist. When morning came, she looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was no longer asking for permission. Ethan watched her from the doorway, his face pale. Please don't do this, he said quietly. You don't know what's at stake. Ava met his eyes, her voice steady. Yes, I do. My name, my work, my dignity. Everything you decided was negotiable. He didn't stop her when she walked past him. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe, deep down, he knew that once a woman decides to be visible, no one can hide her again. Outside, the storm had cleared. The city gleamed, washed clean. And as Ava stepped into the Paris morning, heels clicking against the wet pavement, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Clarity. Tomorrow, the world would see her, whether it wanted to or not. The night of the gala arrived draped in gold. Paris glittered as if the city itself were performing. Carriages of light gliding down the Champs-Élysées, the same shimmering like molten glass under the bridges. Inside Hotel de Ville, the chandeliers burned bright enough to make everyone believe they belonged there. And yet, as Ava Coleman stepped out of the taxi, silence seemed to follow her. She wore a tailored black suit embroidered with gold thread, her own design, sharp as defiance, radiant as armor. The fabric shimmered with every movement, catching the camera flashes like sparks. The rain had stopped, but her hair carried the memory of it, soft curls glistening beneath the entrance lights. For the first time, she didn't walk beside Ethan Ward. She walked alone, and every step was deliberate. Inside, the ballroom was a cathedral of power. Musicians played a string arrangement that floated above the hum of expensive laughter. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying trays of champagne. The air smelled of perfume and old money, polished ambition and practiced charm. At the center of it all stood Ethan. He was magnetic, confident, shaking hands with Paris's elite, the firm partners, investors, designers, press. His laughter sounded easy, his posture immaculate. When he saw her in the doorway, his expression faltered for just a moment before the smile snapped back into place. She could almost hear his thoughts. Not here, not tonight. But Ava was done being managed. A photographer spotted her first. "Madam, over here." The flash illuminated her face, and within seconds, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. She felt their curiosity, their confusion. Who is she? Where did she come from? Ethan crossed the room quickly, his hand gripping her elbow with a smile so tight it trembled. "Ava," he hissed softly, "what are you doing?" "Attending a celebration," she said, voice calm, eyes steady. "Our celebration." "This isn't the time for truth?" she interrupted. "Seems like a perfect night for it." He glanced around. "Please, don't make a scene." "I'm not making a scene," she said. "I'm taking my place." Before he could reply, a woman's voice called out warmly, "Ah, Monsieur Ward." It was Isabelle Duval, the elegant patron of the Maison Duval brand, the woman whose name carried the weight of Parisian fashion itself. She approached with the grace of a queen, her silver gown gliding over marble. Her gaze shifted to Ava, intrigued. "And who is this vision?" Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he smiled. "My dash dash." Ava stepped forward. "I'm Ava Coleman," she said clearly, "the textile designer behind the Maison Duval project." The words hung in the air like shattered crystal. Conversations nearby quieted. Isabel blinked, then turned to Ethan. "Textile designer?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Ava is, well, she's been involved creatively, yes, but the designs were conceptualized under my team." "No," Ava said. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the music. "They were conceptualized by me. Every thread, every pattern you see in this building came from my studio." Cameras turned. Faces leaned in. A silence so complete it roared. Isabel looked between them, her expression unreadable. "Is that true?" Ethan's voice faltered. "Ava, this isn't the place." "Then where is?" she said. "Because for years there's never been a place. Not at dinners, not at meetings, not in magazines. I've spent 3 years creating beauty in your shadow while you smiled for the cameras." Her voice didn't shake. It rose, clear and luminous. "You told me the world wouldn't understand us, Ethan. But what you meant was you didn't. You were afraid that standing beside me would make you smaller, so you built your empire on my silence." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Somewhere the music faltered. Ethan tried to recover, but his charm cracked. "This isn't fair, Ava." "Fair," she said. "You took my work, my name, my dignity, and called it strategy. You told me invisibility was protection, but invisibility is just erasure dressed in courtesy." The words landed like thunder. For a moment, no one moved. Then, unexpectedly, Isabelle Duval smiled. Not the tight, polite smile of society, but something slow, deliberate, approving. "I knew there was something different about those textiles," Isabel said softly. "They have soul. They breathe. And now I see why." She extended her hand to Ava. "Enchanté, Mademoiselle Coleman." Ava's throat tightened. She took Isabel's hand, her pulse trembling against the older woman's steady calm. Ethan stood motionless, his reputation unraveling in real time. Cameras flashed. Every picture captured the truth he'd tried so hard to bury. Ava radiant in gold light, him fading in the background. Isabel turned to the press. "Please, make sure the credits reflect Miss Coleman's contribution properly. Her work deserves its due recognition." A murmur of agreement swept through the room. A few of Ethan's colleagues exchanged uneasy glances. One of them muttered, "Did you know she was involved?" The other shrugged. "He never mentioned her." Ethan's mask finally broke. "You humiliated me," he said under his breath. "No," Ava replied, her eyes fierce. "You did that yourself. I just stopped helping you hide it." He tried to speak, but she was already walking away. As she crossed the ballroom, the crowd parted instinctively. She could feel their gazes, not in judgment, but in awe. The orchestra resumed, this time softer, slower, as if the music itself had bowed to her truth. She reached the grand staircase that led to the terrace. From there, The lights of Paris stretched infinitely, the city glowing beneath a velvet sky. The air smelled of rain and roses. For the first time in years, she felt weightless. The lie had broken, and with it, the walls that had kept her small. Behind her, voices murmured, questions flew, but Ava didn't turn back. She didn't need to. In that moment, she understood something vital. Some storms don't destroy, they cleanse. She lifted her chin, breathing in the cool night. Her reflections shimmered faintly in the glass doors behind her. Not fractured, not fading, but whole. Ethan Ward had built his empire on mirrors, but Ava Coleman had built hers on truth. And in the grandest hall of Paris, beneath the chandeliers that once blinded her, truth was finally the most beautiful thing in the room. Paris was still awake when Ava left the gala. The laughter, the music, the glittering promises of the ballroom all faded behind her like a dying star. The air outside was cold, sharp, and clean, too clean for lies. Her heels struck the cobblestone with measured rhythm, echoing against the quiet streets as if the city were listening. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move. Movement was the only thing that made sense. The night was slick with rain, every puddle a broken mirror reflecting fragments of her. The defiant woman from the gala, the girl who had once believed love was shelter, the artist who had forgotten her name. The reflections rippled as she walked, and it struck her. This city had always been full of mirrors, and she had spent years looking into them for someone else's approval instead of her own reflection. Now she didn't need a mirror to see who she was. The streets of Le Marais glowed faintly with the residue of celebration. A man closed his flower shop, humming softly to himself. Two women laughed over cigarettes outside a cafe. A violinist played under an awning, his melody thin and haunting. Ava passed them all, invisible again. But this time, it didn't hurt. This invisibility was freedom. At a corner, she paused beneath a street lamp. Raindrops clung to her lashes. She pulled out her phone. Dozens of notifications, news outlets, design blogs, messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. Her name was already spreading. Ava Coleman, the hidden artist of Maison Duval. She stared at the words for a long time. Once they would have filled her with joy. Now she felt something different, something deeper. Vindication, yes, but also grief. Because every headline carried proof of what she had lost. Time, trust, love that was never really love. A message appeared on her screen. Ethan, please call me. We need to talk. Ava stood there for a moment, watching the rain beat across the glass, then deleted the message without opening it. The violinist changed songs, something tender and trembling, a melody that sounded like memory. Ava found herself standing still, her body softening against the night. The music seemed to thread through her, unraveling the tightness in her chest. For so long she had lived in the space between apology and ambition. Now there was nothing left to apologize for. She began walking again, down Rue Vieille du Temple, her steps carrying her toward the Seine. The city unfolded like a story written just for her. Bridges glowing, streetlights flickering, the scent of wet stone and chestnut trees in the air. Each sound, each breath, felt amplified, alive. When she reached the river, she stopped. The water moved like silk beneath the arches. Across it, Notre Dame rose from the darkness, a silhouette of endurance. Even scarred by fire, it stood, rebuilt, redefined, still magnificent. Ava leaned on the railing and watched her reflection tremble on the water's surface. "You survived," she whispered. "That's all that matters." The wind tugged at her coat, curling through her hair. Somewhere behind her, a clock chimed midnight. She thought of the years she had given Ethan, the art she'd poured into his hands, the quiet she'd mistaken for safety. She thought of the way he'd looked at her at the gala, a man watching his kingdom crumble. And for the first time, she didn't feel anger. She felt distance. He was just another lesson in a city that had taught her everything the hard way. Her grandmother's words came back to her, whispered across time. "Child, one day you'll learn. Some people love the light you give, but not the fire that makes it burn." Ava smiled faintly. "I know, Grandma," she murmured. "I know now." She closed her eyes and breathed. The night tasted of rain and release. When she opened them again, Paris had softened. The streets seemed to shimmer differently, as though the city was quietly bowing to her, acknowledging her arrival at last. She realized that for the first time since she'd come to France, she wasn't trying to belong. She already did. Across the bridge, a small cafe was still open, its windows fogged with warmth. Ava stepped inside. The room smelled of coffee and croissants gone stale, the kind of imperfection that felt comforting. A young waiter looked up from wiping a table. "Bonsoir, madame. Late night?" Ava nodded. "The longest one." He smiled politely, unaware of the storm she'd just survived. "Something to drink?" "Tea," she said, "strong, and something sweet." When the cup arrived, she wrapped her hands around it, letting the heat seep into her palms. Around her, the cafe was nearly empty, a couple whispering at the back, an old man reading a newspaper, a cat curled on a stool near the window. It was nothing extraordinary, and yet it felt like peace. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, her original sketch for the Maison Duval textiles. The lines were smudged from years of handling. She'd kept it as a reminder of the dream she'd once shared with Ethan. Now it looked different. It wasn't a relic anymore. It was a seed. Ava laid the sketch flat on the table and began to draw again. Her hand trembled at first, then steadied. New lines emerged, bolder, freer, less afraid. She wasn't designing for approval this time. She was designing for truth. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The reflection of streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement like veins of gold. When Ava finally rose to leave, the waiter smiled at her. "Bonne nuit, madame." She nodded. "Good night." But as she stepped back into the cool air, she knew it wasn't an ending. It was the first breath of something unnamed, but inevitable. She walked along the Seine toward her apartment, the rolled sketch tucked under her arm. The world felt lighter, wider. For the first time in years, she could hear the sound of her own footsteps, and she liked their rhythm. Each step whispered a vow to herself. No more shrinking, no more shadows. As she turned a corner, dawn began to stain the sky a pale rose. The city stirred. Somewhere, a baker opened his shop. Somewhere else, bells began to ring. Ava looked up at the awakening skyline, her heart steady, her future unblurred. And in that quiet, trembling hour before sunrise, she realized that sometimes freedom doesn't come with applause or grand gestures. Sometimes it comes simply from walking away and never looking back. The morning after the gala arrived like the aftermath of a storm, quiet, colorless, and raw. Ava woke to the sound of rain dripping against the balcony rail, the kind of soft Parisian drizzle that made the world look blurred, unfinished. Her body ached as though she had survived something physical. In a way, she had. The suit she had worn the night before hung over a chair by the window, the gold embroidery dulled by the gray light. For hours, she simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember what peace was supposed to feel like. The world knew her name now. That truth, once buried under Ethan's shadow, had finally broken free. But freedom, she discovered, doesn't come without weight. Her phone lay silent on the nightstand, face down. She hadn't touched it since she'd deleted Ethan's last message. Somewhere, he was probably trying to clean up the ruins of his image. Apologies spun into explanations, damage control disguised as sincerity. She didn't care. The performance was no longer hers to attend. When she finally rose, she walked barefoot across the cold floor to the window. Below, the street glistened with morning rain. People hurried by under umbrellas, each one living a small, contained story. For years, she had wanted to be invisible among them. Now she stood exposed, shattered, yes, but seen. She made coffee, its bitter scent filling the apartment. The silence was heavy but not cruel. It was an unfamiliar kind of quiet, one that didn't demand, didn't diminish. A soft knock startled her. When she opened the door, a courier stood there holding a pale blue envelope. "From Madame Duval," he said in accented English, tipping his hat. Ava blinked. "Merci." Inside was a letter, handwritten on thick ivory paper. "Mademoiselle Coleman, last night, the world saw what I've known for years, that true artistry cannot be contained by names or titles. I would like to invite you to lunch tomorrow. There are things worth rebuilding, and I believe you are ready to begin. Isabelle Duval." Ava read the letter twice, her pulse quickening. She set it down carefully, as though it might vanish if she moved too fast. For a long moment she stood there, staring out at the rain-soaked rooftops of Paris. Somewhere beneath the exhaustion, something warm began to stir. The next day, she found herself sitting in the rose-colored dining room of Le Pavillon des Rêves, one of those restaurants where time seemed to move more slowly. Isabelle Duval was already there, poised and gracious, her silver hair coiled neatly, a cup of espresso resting between her hands. When Ava approached, Isabelle rose to greet her. "You're even more radiant in daylight," she said with a smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you for inviting me," Ava replied. Her voice was soft, but it carried a steadiness she hadn't felt in years. They sat. For a while, they spoke of ordinary things, the weather, Paris traffic, the chaos of the Gala. But eventually, Isabelle leaned forward, her tone shifting. "You were brave, Ava. Most people spend their lives swallowing truth for the sake of comfort. You didn't." Ava looked down. "I didn't plan to expose him that way. I just couldn't stay quiet anymore." Isabelle nodded. The truth rarely waits for permission. For the first time since the confrontation, Ava allowed herself to exhale. The tension in her shoulders melted, and she met Isabelle's gaze fully. "I thought speaking up would destroy me," she admitted. "Instead, it just destroyed the illusion." "That's what illusions do," Isabelle said. "They shatter beautifully." They shared a quiet moment. Then Isabelle reached into her bag and placed a folder on the table. "These are the original project records from Maison Duval. I've already spoken to the board. We're correcting the credits. Your name will appear beside the designs you created." Ava's breath caught. "You don't have to do that." "I do," Isabelle said simply. "It's the least justice can offer." Ava touched the folder, her fingertips trembling. It wasn't just recognition. It was restoration. Proof that she hadn't imagined her worth. "Tell me," Isabelle continued, "what will you do now?" Ava smiled faintly. "I don't know. For so long, my art belonged to someone else's dream. I think I'd like to find out what it looks like when it belongs only to me." Isabelle's eyes softened. "Then I have a proposition. I run an artist residency on the left bank, a place where creators rebuild themselves after being broken by the world. I think you'd fit there beautifully." Ava blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "You'd really offer me that after everything?" Isabelle reached across the table, touching her hand lightly. "Especially after everything." Outside, the rain had stopped, sunlight pooling through the window onto their tablecloth. For the first time, Ava felt warmth without guilt. That afternoon, she walked along the Seine toward her apartment, the letter from Isabelle tucked inside her coat. The city felt different, gentler, more honest. She passed by street vendors selling scarves, lovers kissing on bridges, artists sketching along the riverbank. The same city that had once suffocated her now seemed to breathe with her. When she reached home, she opened the window wide. The scent of wet stone drifted in, mingling with the faint perfume of her fabrics. She stood in the middle of the room and looked around. The space was still half Ethan's, the minimalist furniture, the sterile gray. But she could already see what it could become. She began tearing the white curtains from the windows, one by one. The sound of the fabric ripping was shockingly satisfying. Then she brought out her paints and brushes, dipping into rich crimson, deep indigo, burnished gold. By evening, the apartment walls were no longer neutral. They pulsed with color, with life. Ava worked until her hands ached, music humming low in the background. It wasn't creation. It was resurrection. When she finally stopped, the sky outside had deepened to violet. She stood back, chest rising and falling, and saw herself reflected in the glass. A woman painted in her own colors again. Her phone vibrated on the table. Another message, another attempt from Ethan. She didn't need to open it. Instead, she scrolled past it, opened a blank note, and began typing ideas for new designs. The first collection title came to her easily. Visible. She smiled. The word fit like skin. That night, as she drifted to sleep, she felt no anger, no grief, just the slow, steady rhythm of peace finding its way back. Because sometimes, being shattered isn't the end of the story. It's the only way the light gets in. The following week unfolded like dawn after a long eclipse, slow, cautious, but filled with light. For the first time in years, Ava woke without dread pressing against her ribs. She brewed coffee, opened the windows, and let the hum of Paris spill inside. The city no longer felt like a cage. It was a language she could finally speak. When she met Isabelle Duval again, it wasn't in a restaurant of polished marble and silver service. It was at a small atelier near Saint-Germain, where sunlight fell through tall windows onto bolts of raw fabric and half-finished gowns. The air smelled of dye and dust and creation. Isabelle stood near a cutting table, speaking with an assistant in rapid French. When she saw Ava, her face brightened. "Bienvenue, ma chère. You're early. I like that." Ava smiled. "I couldn't wait." They talked for hours about design and vision, about color and structure, about the way stories live inside textiles. Then Isabelle led her to a small office lined with sketches and portfolios. On the desk lay a stack of official-looking papers. "I've been thinking," Isabelle said. "You need your independence here, not as someone's assistant or muse, but as your own artist. For that, you'll need something called a carte de séjour, talents et compétences, the artist visa. It recognizes creative contribution to French culture." Ava blinked. "An artist visa? I thought I couldn't apply without Ethan's sponsorship." Isabel's smile was knowing. "That's what he wanted you to believe." A cold wave ran through Ava's chest. Ethan's lie had reached deeper than she'd realized. "He told me I wasn't eligible, that the process was too complicated for foreigners who didn't have institutional backing." "Half-truths," Isabelle said gently. "Complicated, yes. Impossible? Number. You've already contributed to a national project. The Maison Duval collection is proof of your artistry. I can help you file the documentation." Ava felt something inside her loosen, something she hadn't even known was clenched. She nodded slowly, the enormity of it sinking in. For years, Ethan had made her believe she was tethered to him by law, by visa, by necessity. And now, with a few sheets of paper, Isabelle had cut that invisible chain. The process began that afternoon. Ava sat at a wooden desk, filling in forms while rain tapped the windows in gentle rhythm. She listed her exhibitions in Chicago, her collaborations, her textile designs. For the section labeled Artistic Purpose in France, she paused. Then she wrote, "To create work that bridges ancestry and modernity, to weave identity into fabric and let it speak where words cannot." When she handed the papers to Isabelle, the older woman read the line and smiled softly. "That is not a statement," she said. "That is a promise." 2 weeks later, Ava walked through the glass doors of the Préfecture de Police on Ile de la Cité. Bureaucracy moved with its usual glacial patience. Numbers called, stamps slammed, papers shuffled. She waited for hours under fluorescent lights, her heart thudding with a quiet hope that felt foreign in her chest. Finally, a woman behind the counter called her name. "Madame Coleman?" Ava approached. The woman flipped through the documents, then stamped them decisively. "Your visa has been approved," she said in English with a small smile. "Bienvenue à Paris, artiste indépendant." Ava's breath caught. "It's official?" "Oui." Outside, she stood on the bridge over the Seine, the stamped document clutched in her hands. The sky had cleared, and the river glittered in the light. Her reflection trembled in the water below, stronger, freer. It wasn't the same woman who had followed Ethan to Paris. That woman had been defined by proximity. This one was defined by purpose. She laughed softly to herself, a sound carried off by the wind. That night, she met Marianne, her best friend from Chicago, on a video call. Marianne's eyes widened when Ava held up the paper to the camera. "Girl, you did it. I told you, that man was a wall you were meant to break through." Ava smiled. "I thought I needed him to stay. Turns out, I just needed to stop believing him." Marianne's voice softened. "So, what's next?" Ava glanced at her sketchbook, open on the table beside her. "I'm going to build something. Something that belongs entirely to me." And she did. Within a month, she found a modest atelier in Le Marais, an old cobblestone building with cracked windows and ivy curling along its stone walls. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. She painted the door crimson, lined the interior with her fabrics, and hung a small brass plaque by the entrance that read, "Atelier Coleman." Each morning, she walked through the city with coffee in hand, passing the same bakery where the owner had begun greeting her as La Créatrice. She filled her studio with music and color, letting the sound of Nina Simone and Miles Davis guide her stitches. Her art changed too. It grew wilder, freer. She mixed African-inspired motifs with the geometry of Parisian architecture, merging history and rebellion in every thread. Word spread quickly. A journalist from Le Monde requested an interview, calling her the voice of a new generation of textile artists. The photo shoot showed her surrounded by her fabrics, bold swaths of gold and indigo, and the headline read, Ava Coleman, the woman who refused to be erased. One afternoon, as she pinned a new design to her mannequin, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked calm, certain. The old ache, the need to prove herself, had quieted. She whispered to the reflection, "You built this, Ava, from ashes." And it was true. The life Ethan had nearly suffocated had been reborn. A few days later, a letter arrived from Isabel, written in her flowing hand. My dear Ava, there's an upcoming exhibition at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, Women Who Reimagined Form. I've recommended you as a featured artist. Consider it not recognition, but invitation to stand fully in your own light. Yours always, Isabel. Ava read the letter 3 times before pressing it against her chest. She closed her eyes and smiled, feeling the pulse of something that wasn't just pride. It was belonging. As evening fell, she stepped outside her atelier. The street was bathed in the soft glow of lanterns. The air carried the scent of rain and blooming jasmine. Somewhere in the distance, a saxophone played, slow and soulful. She looked up at the sky, a deep, forgiving blue, and thought, so this is what it means to rise from your own ashes. The phoenix didn't just fly. It built its wings while burning. And Ava Coleman had finally learned how. It began on an ordinary Tuesday that didn't feel like it should matter. The Paris sky was pale and wide, the kind of morning that made everything seem possible. Ava was working in her studio, a half-finished bolt of indigo fabric stretched across her table, when the knock came. When she opened the door, a woman stood there, a striking figure in a cream trench coat and sculptural earrings, her short curls catching the light. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Bonjour, she said warmly. I hope I'm not intruding. I'm Chiara Lemoyne. Ava blinked. The name was familiar. The designer? Chiara smiled. The very one. Isabelle Duval speaks highly of you. She said if I wanted to remember why I started creating in the first place, I should come meet Ava Coleman. Ava felt her throat tighten with something between surprise and gratitude. Please, come in. Chiara stepped inside, her gaze sweeping the room. Fabrics draped over chairs, spools of thread scattered across the floor, sketches taped to the walls like constellations. Mon Dieu, she murmured, this place feels alive. It's not a studio, it's a heartbeat. Ava laughed softly. It's chaos, that's what it is. Chaos is what art looks like before it knows it's beautiful. They spent the next few hours talking about color, about storytelling through design, about the loneliness that comes with creation. Ava learned that Chiara was one of Paris's few black couture designers, known for her defiant elegance and political boldness. Her work had graced runways, but her voice, she said, had often been softened in translation. I've had to fight to be heard in rooms I helped build, Chiara confessed. So when I saw what you did at that gala, I thought, finally. Someone else who understands the cost of visibility. Ava smiled wryly. Visibility has teeth. Chiara's expression softened. Yes, but it also has wings. Before leaving, Chiara handed her a sleek black card embossed with gold lettering. Maison Lemoine. I host a gathering once a month, she said. Women in design, architecture, art, fashion. Women who've had to carve their names into marble with their bare hands. Come this Saturday. You belong with us. That weekend, Ava found herself standing before an old townhouse on Rue de Varenne. Its tall doors painted the color of wine. From the street, faint laughter and the sound of jazz drifted out. Inside, the air shimmered with energy. The salon was a mosaic of brilliance, women of every age and shade, draped in silk, denim, and conviction. There was a painter from Ghana who turned trauma into surrealism, a poet from Marseille who wrote verses about migration and loss, a sculptor from Tunisia who welded steel into the shapes of rising hands. And at the center, Kiara, radiant in a crimson dress, her presence magnetic. She greeted Ava with a hug that felt like recognition. "Welcome to Les Invisibles," she said. "The women who refuse to stay unseen." Ava felt her pulse steady. They gathered around a long oak table. Champagne glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell like music. But beneath it all ran something deeper, a current of truth. Every woman there carried a scar, a story of erasure turned into art. When it was Ava's turn to speak, she hesitated. All eyes turned to her, expectant but kind. "I used to think my work needed someone else's name to matter," she began. "I thought love meant shrinking myself so another person could fit more comfortably beside me. But the moment I stopped apologizing for taking up space, I realized I had been building cathedrals in secret all along." The room fell quiet. Then someone began to clap. The sound spread, echoing softly through the room until everyone was applauding, not out of politeness, but solidarity. Kiara leaned in and whispered, "You're not just an artist, Ava. You're a mirror. You remind us of what we've survived." As the night deepened, they shared more than ideas. They shared memories, their first failures, their first triumphs, the first time they'd realized they were extraordinary and that the world would make them pay for it. There were tears, laughter, silence that spoke louder than words. Later, on the balcony overlooking the city, Ava stood beside Kiara. Below them, Paris glittered like spilled stars. "I forgot what this felt like," Ava said softly. "Being surrounded by women who don't see me as competition." Kiara handed her a glass of wine. "We've all been taught to see each other that way. But power isn't meant to be hoarded. It's meant to be shared." She turned to Ava. "I have a proposition. I'm preparing a new collection for the Prix Lumière, the biggest fashion competition in France. I want your textiles in it. Not as accents, not as background, but as the foundation." Ava froze. "Kiara, that's bold?" Kiara grinned. "Exactly. They won't expect it. They'll have to see it." Ava's heart thudded. "Why me?" Kiara looked at her for a long moment. "Because your work feels like truth. And I want to dress women in truth." Something inside Ava cracked open. An old fear, an older dream. "Then let's do it." Kiara's grin widened. "Good. Because I've already told the committee you're my co-designer." Ava laughed, stunned. "You what?" "Too late to back out now." They clinked glasses, the laughter spilling into the night. When Ava returned to her studio hours later, she stood in front of her mirror, exhaustion and exhilaration fighting for space in her chest. The reflection that stared back no longer looked like the woman who had walked out of the Hotel de Ville months ago. She looked like someone new, someone reborn by fire and rebuilt by sisterhood. On her work table lay the fabric she had begun before Kiara arrived, a deep bronze weave that shimmered like sunlight on skin. She ran her fingers over it, imagining what it would become. A dress, a banner, a story. Paris slept outside, but Ava stayed awake, sketching, sewing, dreaming. And as the first light of morning crept through her window, it caught the curve of her smile. A quiet, certain promise that the next chapter of her life would be written not in survival, but in creation. Because now, she wasn't walking alone. She had found her circle, and together, they were unstoppable. The first day they began working on the collection, Kiara threw open the atelier windows and declared, "We're not designing clothes. We're designing a revolution." Ava laughed, but she understood. The air inside Maison Lemoine crackled with purpose. Rolls of fabric leaned against the walls like sleeping giants waiting to be awakened. The long oak tables were covered with sketches, pins, and fragments of color. Blood red, deep gold, ocean blue. The hum of the sewing machine sounded like a heartbeat. They called the collection Visible. It was Kiara's idea, but the name came from Ava's story. Each garment would tell a stage of transformation, erasure, resistance, emergence, radiance, 12 pieces, 12 incarnations of freedom. Ava designed the textiles as if she were painting memories. She mixed architectural lines with organic shapes, blending geometry and motion. Her colors defied logic, warm tones clashing with cool ones, harmony born from defiance. The fabrics shimmered differently under light, as if refusing to stay still. At night, when the city outside went quiet, Ava stayed behind in the atelier, surrounded by the half-formed dresses. She would trace her fingers across the threads and whisper to them like old friends. Each stitch, each fold carried a piece of her story. Every moment she had been told to soften, to wait, to dim herself. Kiara often worked beside her until dawn, both women wordless in their focus. Sometimes music played low from a vintage speaker, jazz, soul, Nina Simone's voice spilling through the room like prayer. Other times, silence reigned, broken only by the rhythm of scissors slicing through fabric. One night, as they stepped back from a finished gown, a floor-length creation of black silk streaked with gold veins, Kiara turned to Ava. "This one," she said quietly, "is you." Ava tilted her head. "Why?" "Because it's made of scars," Kiara said, "and it's beautiful because of them." The week before the show, journalists began calling. Word of their collaboration had spread across Paris. "Two women redefining couture," one headline read. "The rebirth of honesty in fashion," another claimed. But Ava felt none of the glamour the articles described. She felt raw, exposed. The closer the show came, the more she realized what she was truly unveiling wasn't fabric, it was herself. The night before the pre-Lumiere competition, she sat alone in her studio, surrounded by pieces of the collection. The city outside pulsed with quiet light, but inside, the air was heavy with memory. She thought of Ethan, his smooth voice, his careful lies. She thought of her younger self in Chicago, sketching on the floor with dreams bigger than rent. She thought of her grandmother, who had taught her to sew under the hum of a single bulb, saying, "When the world won't give you a crown, baby, stitch one yourself." Ava smiled faintly. "I think I've finally finished it," she whispered to the empty room. When morning came, the Grand Palais was transformed into a cathedral of light. Glass ceilings arched high above, scattering sunlight like divine fire. Rows of guests filled the space. Editors, designers, critics, the titans of fashion who decided what stories were worthy of being told. Backstage, Kiara clasped Ava's hands. "Whatever happens tonight," she said, "we've already won." Ava nodded, but her pulse thundered. Then the music began. One by one, the models stepped onto the runway, each piece of Visible telling its chapter. The first, a white gown, pristine but bound at the waist, symbolized silence. The next, streaked with crimson, broke those bindings. By the fourth, the garments had evolved into vibrant declarations of color and texture. When the 11th model walked, the audience was breathless. Her dress was made of fragments, woven patches of fabric representing broken glass, broken promises, broken hearts, all stitched into a single masterpiece. The light struck it, and suddenly it wasn't broken at all. It gleamed, and then came the finale. The 12th piece, the one Ava and Kiara had kept secret until now. A fusion of structure and soul. A fitted jacket with angular shoulders and a long, fluid skirt that rippled like molten metal. Gold thread glinted through black silk, tracing patterns of lightning across darkness. It wasn't just a garment, it was testimony. As the model walked, the music shifted, slow, powerful, almost sacred. The audience leaned forward, drawn in by something they couldn't quite name. They weren't just seeing fashion, they were witnessing reclamation. When the show ended, there was silence. Not polite silence, the kind that comes when a room forgets to breathe. Then, like the first crack of thunder after a storm, applause erupted. People rose to their feet, cameras flashed. Kiara turned to Ava, eyes wet. "Look!" Ava blinked back tears as she watched strangers, critics, designers, editors, clap for what she once hid in shadows. For a moment, the applause blurred into a distant hum. What mattered wasn't the recognition, it was the release. That night, when the awards were announced, Visible was named the winner of the Prix-Lumière. Kiara pulled Ava onto the stage beside her. As the crowd roared, Ava felt the light hit her face. The same light that had once felt like judgment, now felt like belonging. She wasn't hiding behind anyone's name. She wasn't apologizing for her existence. When Kiara handed her the microphone, Ava hesitated. The room fell still. She took a breath, her voice soft but unwavering. "They told me invisibility was humility," she began. That silence was grace. But tonight, I understand. Neither of those things are love. Visibility isn't arrogance. It's acknowledgement. It's saying, I am here, and I always was. Her words echoed through the glass hall. Cameras clicked, flashes flickered, but Ava wasn't speaking for them. She was speaking for every person who had ever been erased and forced to smile through it. When she finished, the applause rose again, louder, deeper, the sound of a world shifting, even if only by an inch. Later, as the crowd thinned and the champagne glasses clinked softly in the distance, Ava stood by the runway alone. The lights had dimmed, but one spotlight still lingered on the stage. Dust danced in the beam like tiny galaxies. Kiara joined her quietly. Do you see what you've done? Ava exhaled. No, she said softly. I see what we've started. And there, in the fading light of the Grand Palais, surrounded by echoes of her own courage, Ava Coleman finally understood the power of being seen. She hadn't just survived the fire, she had turned it into light. The night of the Prélumière lingered in Ava's memory like a dream that refused to fade. In the days that followed, the world seemed to open for her. Interviews, collaborations, invitations. Her name, once a whisper in someone else's shadow, now shone across headlines in elegant fonts. Ava Coleman, the woman who turns silence into art. But even triumph has echoes, and sometimes ghosts learn to find their way back through applause. It was late afternoon when she saw him again. Ava had been standing backstage at the Grand Palais, where Visible was being re-exhibited for a private viewing. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, refracting into shards of gold. The models moved like living art, the fabrics catching light in waves. And then, through the crowd, between the lenses, the journalists, the orbit of admiration, she felt it before she saw it. That pull of recognition, the air tightening around her. Ethan Ward. He looked different, thinner, sharper, the confidence dulled around the edges. His once perfect posture carried an invisible weight. His eyes swept the room, and when they found hers, the noise of the crowd seemed to fade, replaced by a single, quiet heartbeat. Ava's hands stilled against the fabric she was adjusting. Her pulse rose, but not in fear. It was something else, an old ache remembering itself. He approached slowly, rehearsed smile in place. Ava, he said, as if testing the sound of her name, uncertain whether he still had the right to use it. You look extraordinary. She regarded him with calm eyes, the kind that reveal nothing. You always liked things that looked extraordinary. He winced, just slightly. I deserve that. I could give you worse, she said lightly, then turned back to the model she'd been helping. But I've outgrown cruelty. Even when it's deserved. Ethan hesitated, watching her. I came to see your work. My work? Ava looked up, one eyebrow lifting. You mean the work you once said wouldn't be understood? His jaw flexed. I was wrong. She folded her arms. You were careful, not wrong. There's a difference. He looked away, shame flickering behind his composure. Around them, guests moved like rivers of silk and perfume, oblivious to the small gravity forming in their corner. I lost everything after that night, he said finally. The firm, my clients, the press tore me apart. I deserved it, I know that. But I've spent every day since trying to make sense of how I became that person. Ava studied him quietly. His voice trembled on the edges, not the confident architect she once followed across an ocean, but a man stripped of his illusions. I didn't come for forgiveness, he continued. I came because I needed to see the woman I should have stood beside. The one who built what I was too afraid to build with her own hands. Her throat tightened, not from longing, but from memory. There was a time when words like his would have broken her open, flooded her with the dangerous hope that he'd finally seen her. But that time was gone. You came to see if I'd still make you feel like you mattered, Ava said softly. But that's not my job anymore. He nodded slowly, accepting the truth like a man who had already expected to bleed. For a long moment, neither spoke. The room hummed with life, the low thrum of music, the rustle of fabric, the sound of creation continuing without permission. Ethan looked at the dress on display before them, a cascade of woven black silk and gold thread, the one Kiara had said looked like scars made beautiful. His voice was barely above a whisper. That one, he said, It feels like us. Ava smiled faintly. No, that one's about me. He turned to her, eyes glistening. You really don't hate me? She shook her head. Hate is a kind of tether. I've cut them all. Her words landed like a soft mercy, one he hadn't earned. But Ava had long stopped keeping accounts of who owed whom. A silence settled between them, not hostile, but final. She realized that forgiveness didn't always come as a grand moment. Sometimes it was simply the absence of pain. Ethan stepped back, his expression unguarded, fragile. You were always the light, he said quietly. I just kept trying to dim it so I could look brighter. Ava's eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. The thing about light, she said, is it doesn't compete. It just shines. You could have stood beside it, Ethan, but you chose to stand in front of it. He nodded. There was nothing left to say. He looked around the room one last time, the space alive with color, women, laughter, art, and for the briefest second, Ava saw gratitude flicker in his eyes. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the hum of the crowd. The ghost was gone. Ava exhaled, not realizing she had been holding her breath. Kiara appeared at her side, silent, but knowing. That him? She asked. Ava nodded. Kiara smiled. He looks smaller in person than in the stories. Ava laughed softly. He always was. They stood together for a moment, watching the guests wander through the exhibition, tracing their fingers along the fabrics, taking photos, whispering admiration. You handled that with grace, Kiara said. Grace isn't forgiveness, Ava replied. It's closure. Outside, the Paris sky was turning indigo, the city lighting itself one window at a time. Ava walked toward the glass doors at the end of the hall, drawn by the view. The reflection that met her there startled her for a moment, not because she didn't recognize it, but because she finally did. No shadows behind her, no borrowed light. Just Ava Coleman, visible, steady, unafraid. Behind her, the lights dimmed as the last guest left. She lingered for a while longer, watching the city glow below, feeling the rhythm of it pulse in her chest. Somewhere out there, Ethan was a man learning to live without the illusions he'd once built. And she, finally, was a woman living inside her truth. The ghost of her past had returned, but instead of haunting her, he had proved something she hadn't dared to believe until now, that she had at last outgrown her own pain. And in that realization, Ava smiled. Not for him, not for the world, but for herself. The light didn't need permission anymore. It was hers, always had been, always would be. The night of the Prix-Lumière award ceremony was one of those Paris evenings that seemed too cinematic to be real. Air heavy with perfume and electricity. The sky a bruise of violet fading into gold. The city hummed with expectation. Inside the Grand Theatre, 1,000 candles flickered against the mirrored walls. The stage gleamed like a promise. Ava stood backstage, her heart steady, her hands clasped around a small piece of gold-threaded fabric she'd brought for courage. The master of ceremonies' voice echoed through the hall. And now, he said, the Prix-Lumière for visionary design, honoring innovation, storytelling, and the redefinition of beauty. A hush fell over the audience. Ava closed her eyes, feeling the air vibrate. The list of nominees was read, 4 names, all legends in their own right. Her name came last. There was a pause, the soft crackle of tension, and then Ava Coleman and Kiara Lemoyne for Visible. The applause rose like thunder. For a moment, Ava didn't move. Kiara turned to her, laughing through tears. You did it, she whispered. We did it. Ava stepped into the light. The brightness hit her like a wave, and for the first time, it didn't blind. It revealed. The crowd stood, clapping, cheering. Faces blurred into a sea of color and sound. Somewhere near the front, Isabelle Duval smiled with quiet pride, her hands folded in approval. As Ava reached the podium, the applause softened. She could hear her own breath again. Kiara handed her the microphone. Ava hesitated, then spoke, her voice calm, rich, alive. When I came to this city, she began, I thought I had to become smaller to fit into its beauty. I thought love meant invisibility, that silence was safety, and that being seen was something you had to earn. The audience leaned forward. The room was silent but not empty. It was full of listening. I learned, she continued, that visibility isn't arrogance. It's acknowledgement. It's saying, I exist. And that existence, especially for those of us who were never meant to be at this table, is a form of creation. Her gaze swept the room. This award isn't just for me. It's for every woman who's ever been told her voice was too loud, her skin too dark, her story too bold. It's for those who kept creating, even when no one was watching. A single tear traced down her cheek, catching the light. She didn't wipe it away. As she finished, the crowd rose again, applause cascading like rain. She caught sight of Kiara beside her, clapping, radiant. Behind her, the golden letters PRIXLUMIERE shimmered like constellations. And in that moment, Ava realized something. This wasn't the culmination of her journey. It was the translation of her pain into purpose. Every broken promise, every night spent questioning her worth, had built the architecture of this moment. When the ceremony ended, Ava found herself on the terrace outside, away from the noise. The Paris skyline stretched before her. Endless rooftops, endless light. The Eiffel Tower flickered in the distance, its glow reflected in the Seine, like a crown laid across the water. She took off her shoes, feeling the cool stone beneath her feet. The night air wrapped around her like silk. Isabel appeared beside her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. You spoke beautifully, she said. I didn't plan it, Ava replied. It just came out. The best truths usually do. They drank in silence for a while, the kind of silence that feels earned. Then Isabel turned to her. Do you understand now, ma chère? What you've done? Ava smiled faintly. I think so. You've turned survival into art, Isabel said. That's what real creation is. Not escaping the darkness, but shaping it into something that shines. Ava looked down at her reflection in the glass doors, haloed by the theater's warm light. It's strange, she murmured. For years I thought light was something you had to chase. Now I realize it's something you carry. Isabel's eyes softened. That's your crown, Ava, the one no one can take. Later that night, back in her apartment, Ava placed the award on her work table. Around it lay scraps of fabric from Visible, gold threads, black silk, indigo dye staining the wood. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and new beginnings. She sat, the glow of the trophy reflecting in her eyes. Her phone buzzed. Hundreds of messages, articles, interviews, but she didn't pick it up. She wasn't searching for validation anymore. Instead, she opened her sketchbook. The next collection began to take shape beneath her pencil, rough lines forming a design that felt both ancient and new. She wrote the title across the top in careful script, The Crown of Light. It would be more than fashion. It would be testament. Each piece would tell the story of becoming. How light is not the opposite of darkness, but its air. How beauty, once silenced, can roar. As she sketched, dawn crept through the window. The city outside stirred awake. Ava paused, watching the pale glow bloom across the sky. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was watching Paris. She felt like she was part of it. The world had finally seen her, yes, but more importantly, she had seen herself. And in that soft, sacred moment between night and day, Ava Coleman, daughter, artist, survivor, placed her invisible crown atop her head. Not made of jewels, but of everything she had endured and transformed. The light touched her face, tender and fierce all at once. It wasn't borrowed anymore. It was hers. It had always been hers. Paris was waking up again. The city pulsed with new stories. But for Ava Coleman, the rhythm had changed. She was no longer chasing its tempo. She was composing her own. In the weeks following her pre-Lumiere victory, Ava's world swelled with opportunity. Journalists called her the voice of modern identity. Designers quoted her speech. Her name was spoken in rooms that had once refused to pronounce it. Yet in the midst of the whirlwind, Ava felt a stillness she'd never known. Recognition was sweet, but creation, that was home. One crisp morning, she received a message from Isabelle Duval. Come to Rue des Saints-Pères at noon. There's something I want to show you. Ava arrived to find Isabel waiting in front of a centuries-old building, tucked behind an iron gate. Its stone facade was weathered and pale, ivy climbing across its face like green lace. The windows were shuttered, but sunlight slipped through the cracks in golden slivers. "What is this place?" Ava asked. Isabel smiled, her voice soft but charged. "It was once a convent, then an orphanage. It's been abandoned for nearly 30 years, but I've purchased it." Ava's eyes widened. "You bought this?" "For restoration," Isabel replied, "and I want you to lead it, with me." The words hung in the air like a bell tone. Ava blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. "Me? You," Isabel said, stepping closer. "You understand beauty and history. You build from broken things. This place deserves a rebirth, and so do the women who will work here." Ava turned slowly, taking in the cracked courtyard, the arched doorways half swallowed by vines. There was something sacred about it, even in its decay. The scent of earth and memory filled the air. "What would it become?" Ava asked quietly. "A sanctuary," Isabel said. "A home for artists and designers who've been silenced or overlooked. A space for visibility, collaboration, and restoration. I'll fund it. You'll design it. Together we'll call it La Maison de René, the House of Rebirth." For the first time in a long while, Ava was speechless. She felt the air shift, as if her past and future had just touched hands. "Why me?" she finally whispered. Isabel smiled. "Because you know what it means to lose everything and still create." The following weeks unfolded like a dream wrapped in hard work. Ava and Isabel built a small team, architects, restoration experts, and a circle of women artists from Chiara's network. The project became their shared heartbeat. Every morning, Ava arrived early to walk the courtyard before the construction crews began. The sound of hammers echoed like distant drums, and dust hung in the air like incense. She traced her fingers along the old stone walls, imagining how light would fall through new glass, how laughter would fill the empty hallways again. When the restoration began, Ava designed the interiors with reverence. She kept the original arches but filled the walls with color: deep ochre, soft rose, rich indigo. She refused sterile perfection. She wanted warmth, texture, fingerprints. The main hall, once a chapel, became an open gallery space crowned with stained glass panels that caught morning light like fire. In the evenings, she and Isabel sat together in the courtyard, sipping tea as the sun bled across the sky. Sometimes they spoke about art, sometimes about womanhood, sometimes about nothing at all. It was a quiet companionship, built not on mentorship anymore, but equality. One evening, Chiara joined them, carrying sketches for her new line. "You two are making history," she said, settling into a chair. "Paris won't know what hit her." Ava laughed softly. "I'm not sure Paris ever knows. It just learns to adapt." Isabel. As the months passed, La Maison des Renés transformed from ruins into resurrection. The project attracted attention from across Europe. Magazines called it a revolution in the language of restoration. Critics praised its fusion of heritage and modernity. But what she watched a young Syrian weaver smile as her tapestries hung for the first time in the gallery, saw a blind sculptor run her hands over her finished marble piece, tears streaking her cheeks, heard laughter echo through hallways that had once been filled with prayer and silence. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a living heartbeat. And in every brick, Ava saw echoes of her own journey. The way something shattered could still be rebuilt stronger, truer. One afternoon, while overseeing the installation of a final exhibit, Ava stood in the center of the hall. The light through the stained glass bathed her in amber and rose. She felt it warm her skin, and for a moment, she thought of her grandmother. "When the world tries to take your name, stitch it into something they can't destroy." Ava smiled. "I did, Grandma," she whispered. "I stitched it into everything." When the grand opening arrived, the courtyard was filled with guests, artists, journalists, friends, strangers. Chiara wore crimson. Isabel's silver hair caught the light like silk. Ava stood between them, her heart swelling with quiet pride. As the ribbon was cut, applause rippled through the air. The doors swung open, revealing the gallery. Walls alive with color, fabrics swaying softly, sculptures gleaming. The inscription above the entrance read, "From silence, creation. From creation, light." Ava stepped inside, her reflection caught in the glass panels that framed the hall. She didn't flinch at her own image anymore. She met her gaze and smiled. A woman made not of perfection, but of persistence. Later, when the crowd thinned and twilight fell, Isabel found her alone by the windows. "You've given this place a soul," she said quietly. Ava turned to her, her eyes shimmering in the dying light. "You gave me the chance to." "No," Isabel replied. "You gave yourself permission." Outside, the bells of St. Sulpice began to ring, deep and resonant. Ava looked toward the sky, the last rays of sunset crowning the horizon. Partnership had once been her prison. Now it was her freedom. And as she stood amid the laughter, the light, and the rebirth she had helped shape, Ava understood something profound. True partnership wasn't about dependence or control. It was about two forces meeting without dimming each other. It was about creation born of respect and light born of truth. She exhaled, the sound gentle, like gratitude finding its voice. Paris glowed outside the windows, its chaos, its beauty, its contradictions. And in the center of it all stood La Maison des Renés, radiant, alive, eternal, her final proof that brokenness, when shared, could become art. And that rebirth, when chosen, was the most powerful creation of all. Years later, Paris would still speak her name as if it were a note in a timeless song. Ava Coleman, the woman who stitched light into fabric, who turned silence into architecture, who proved that art was not only what one made, but who one became. Time, as it always does, moved on. The city changed. Buildings rose, faces disappeared, the world sped faster. But on Rue des Saints-Pères, behind the iron gate wrapped in ivy, La Maison des Renés still stood. And every morning, when the light spilled through its stained glass windows, it painted the courtyard in shades of amber and gold. Her colors. Inside, young designers worked at long oak tables, sketching, cutting, dreaming. The air hummed with energy and purpose. On the central wall of the main hall, framed beneath the arch Ava herself had restored, hung a single quote engraved in brass. From silence, creation. From creation, light. They called it Ava's Law. Her story had become legend, not because of fame, but because of transformation. The tale of a woman who arrived in Paris with nothing but a sketchbook and a heart full of fractures, and who built an empire, not from ambition, but from resilience. Some of the students whispered myths about her, that she had once sewn a dress from her own heartbreak, that she could weave emotion into color. But those who had met her knew the truth. Ava Coleman's greatest creation wasn't a dress, or a collection, or even La Maison. It was belief. Belief that visibility was a right. Belief that beauty was resistance. Belief that art could heal what the world broke. Chiara Lemoyne took over as director of the house after Isabelle Duval passed. Together they had once dreamed of revolution. Now, Chiara made sure it never ended. Every year she hosted the Crown of Light Fellowship, a scholarship for young artists from forgotten corners of the world. On opening night, she always began with the same words. Ava taught us that survival is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of creation. And somewhere, it was said, Ava still watched. Sometimes from the balcony of her quiet home on the edge of Montmartre, where ivy climbed the walls and the scent of jasmine filled the evenings. Sometimes from the benches near the Seine, where she liked to sketch strangers, their movements fluid and imperfect, beautiful in their humanity. She no longer needed to chase recognition. The world had learned her language. One autumn morning, long after the world had started calling her a legend, Ava returned to La Maison des Renés. The courtyard was alive with chatter, students hanging fabrics on lines, musicians tuning instruments for an exhibition, sunlight glinting off glass sculptures. She walked unnoticed at first, wearing a simple linen coat and a scarf of her own design, soft gold streaked with violet. Her steps echoed on the old stone floor. Then a young girl looked up from her sewing machine. "Madame Coleman?" she breathed, awe flooding her voice. Ava smiled, her eyes kind. "Just Ava." The girl stood, trembling slightly. "Your work, it changed how I see the world. I didn't think someone like me could belong here." Ava placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The world belongs to those who dare to create, even when it tells them not to. Never forget that." And just like that, the circle continued, old light passing into new hands. That night, the city celebrated the 10-year anniversary of La Maison des Renés. The building glowed, alive with music and laughter. Kiara gave her speech, raising a glass beneath the stained glass ceiling. "To the woman who made us visible," she said, her voice breaking, "and to every woman who refuses to disappear." Applause thundered. Ava stood quietly in the corner, the light dancing across her face. She thought of her grandmother's voice again. "When the world won't give you a crown, stitch one yourself." She smiled. "I did," she whispered to herself, "and now it shines on others." As midnight approached, she stepped outside into the cool Paris air. The city was alive, music spilling from open doors, the Seine glittering beneath the moon. She walked to the bridge where she used to sit when she was young and uncertain. The same bridge where she once dreamed of being seen. Now she stood there visible. More than that, unforgettable. She leaned on the railing, her reflection merging with the light on the water. The crown she wore wasn't made of gold or diamonds. It was made of every failure she'd transformed, every truth she'd spoken, every woman she'd lifted. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from the house, echoing across the river like music. Ava closed her eyes and breathed it in. Legacy, she realized, wasn't what you left behind. It was what continued to grow when you were gone. And hers, woven through fabric, through mentorship, through every woman who dared to begin, was eternal. She turned to go, the moonlight following her, soft and steady. As she disappeared down the quiet Paris street, a whisper seemed to linger in the air, carried on the night breeze. A message for anyone still afraid to step into their own light. You are not invisible. You are becoming. And if you've ever felt unseen, if the world has ever told you to shrink, to quiet, to hide, remember Ava's story. Remember the stitches made from heartbreak, the fire turned into color, the silence reshaped into song. Because the legacy of light doesn't belong to her alone. It belongs to everyone brave enough to keep creating in the dark. So tell your story, share your truth, shine, even when it trembles. And one day, someone will stand in their own light because you refuse to dim yours. That will be your legacy.